somebody came up with the idea that if you spread it on the wall, apart from it dries, which means that it doesn't have the same impact upon you, apart from the initial couple of minutes that it takes to do that. But it was absolutely unbelievably horrendous.
I think most unionists find the position somewhat outlandish. Saw the dirty protest as being absolutely a form of bestial behaviour, and took the view that the persons who would voluntarily behave in that way were making themselves somehow less than human. And I think the unionist community would have had just intense contempt for people who behaved that way.
The actual blanket protest was a very onerous protest for the men involved and the families of the men involved. We knew that in physical circumstances, because many of us were doing very long sentences, that it was unreasonable to ask our men to stay and remain in these conditions indefinitely. We knew we were coming to a situation where we had to take very radical decisions, and being Republicans, with our history, with our tradition, with what was at stake, bear in mind, because what was at stake was the key question, the crucial question: is this struggle, is it a criminal conspiracy, is it an aggravated crime wave as the British had attempted to deem it, or is this a political struggle with political objectives being carried out by politically motivated people? That was what was at stake.
On the streets, the Republican movement mobilized its supporters, but also tried to win sympathy for the prisoners' demands within the more moderate nationalist community.
Well, the SDLP had been in favour of some form of political status, and throughout this whole period, the SDLP supported anyone who had any proposal which we thought might have contributed to a compromise, whether in relation to the British government or Sinn Féin. That, of course, receded when Maggie Thatcher took over as Prime Minister in '79, because she made it very clear from the very beginning that under no circumstances would she accept political status.
We saw Thatcher as being a very repressive leader. She herself created the expression that the lady's not for turning. She was seen to be a real problem in terms of being a pragmatist, or in terms of being flexible, or in terms of abandoning this issue.
Well, as soon as she had become leader of the Conservative Party and leader of the opposition, Irish politicians, particularly Gareth Fitzgerald, maintained a good contact with her. But the nature of the relationship in those early years was almost that of a teacher and a pupil. She knew little about Ireland. She had very little feeling for what was happening in Ireland. And that extended, in my view, to her not fully appreciating or understanding unionism, no more than she understood republicanism or Irish nationalism.
Outside the prison, the IRA intensified its armed campaign. In just one day, the 27th of August 1979, it killed the Queen's cousin, Lord Mountbatten, in Sligo, as well as 18 British soldiers in an ambush in South Down. Amidst such carnage, and with the election of Margaret Thatcher as Prime Minister just 2 months earlier, the IRA prisoners saw any hope of concessions from the British government recede, and they began to plan their next dramatic move.
The period leading up to the first hunger strike was one of immense discussion and debate within the prison. And I happened to be on the same block as Brendan Hughes, same wing actually as Brendan Hughes and Bobby Sands, and Tommy McCartney was actually in the next cell to me. So what occurred was a series of discussions with all prisoners as to what road should be taken, and there was a general consensus that hunger strike should be adopted. This only came after a very, very protracted head-to-head between the prison leadership and the leadership outside who were opposed to hunger strike action. And it was a very, very hard battle.
Well, it was made very, very clear to the prisoners that we on the outside were opposed to a hunger strike. We were of the view that Thatcher wouldn't bend.
They would advise that they didn't feel it would work. They felt it was too dangerous. You know, you were going out and you were putting all your eggs in one basket.
We were saying to them, look, you can't stop us going on a hunger strike because you cannot do anything to end this nightmare that we are living in. Right? Now, if you can't end it, we're going to have to end it ourselves.
They were reluctant to easily or blithely give us the go-ahead to go on strike. So they told us that they were going to have to think very seriously about it, but they had to think about it in the context that they had been unable to break the deadlock. Eventually, they were brought around to accept the fact that they could not break the deadlock, and they said that we then could, if we wished to and thought it best, to go ahead with the strike. There are very specific rules and regulations within the IRA that a hunger strike cannot be embarked upon by members of the IRA without the very clear specific sanction of the Army Council, who can allow it to go ahead and equally can call it off.
On the 27th of October 1980, Tommy McKerney and 6 other Republican prisoners refused their prison food. They insisted that if the British government did not meet their demand for political status, they would starve themselves to death.
Mrs. Thatcher's line on the hunger strike was emphatic from the start. In other words, there is no political justification for murder. You can have a blanket protest, you can have a dirty protest, you can go on the hunger strike. If you want to kill yourselves, that's up to you. But there is nothing that's going to move me on the question that murder is murder is murder, as she once put it. In that sense, what you have from the government at the start is a fairly inflexible and formidable stance. We are not going to yield on this.
She saw the demands for political status as simply an attempt to weaken the authority of the state, and secondly, so far as hunger striking is concerned, it was terrorism by another name and another route. And she wasn't going to give in to that.
It created a difficulty for the Irish government because, on the one hand, no Irish government could demand of a British government that it concede to the prisoners, because after all, in the southern jurisdiction, there was never any question of the government conceding to the demands of prisoners. On the other hand, all Irish governments realised that unless the situation was handled with tact and with great care, what would happen would be that support for the IRA would inevitably increase.
Coming week, you must bend every muscle, strain every nerve in support of the hunger strikers. This is a showdown with imperialism.
Throughout Ireland, the Republican movement did its utmost to rally support for the hunger strikers. But inside the maze, as one man reached a critical condition and rumours of government concessions began to circulate, the prisoners decided that this strike should not end in death.
It started on the 27th of October and it finished on the 18th, 19th of December. And what transpired was it was a series of private sort of interventions. People had made representation to the Northern Ireland office. We had asked the Irish government, we had asked various agencies to intercede to try and bring a bit of pressure to bear on the British to negotiate or to either grant the 5 demands or at least send somebody in to negotiate.